If we move to microphone number 1.
Chair, I'd like to introduce Mr. Craig Caulfield, shareholder. Please.
Welcome, Mr. Caulfield.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Malley, and welcome too as the new chairman.
Thank you very much.
Of Australia's most important financial institution. There's a lot of responsibilities for you and the board there. Before my questions, I want to raise an issue of AGM governance that is of concern to me. There are several questions I'd like to raise later, some of which I speak for other bank shareholders that are interstate or remote. They're unable to physically attend the meeting this morning, online that is. They were unaware of this. Now, we've had quite a bit of dialogue, you might be aware, last night with Carmel Mulhern, Company Secretary's office, but CBA's notice of meeting was cleverly worded to obscure the fact that interstate and remote online viewers at today's AGM are prevented from speaking. There's no host here to take to speak on their behalf. They can't type any questions into their computers. You did allow this last year. You did allow this the year before. It's been a long time. A lot of shareholders haven't had access. So you speak of care, courage and commitment. I want you to add the word doubt whenever we hear those 3 words. Michael Hodge, the barrister at the Royal Commission, he said doubt is very valuable. So everything that we think that we've got right, if we just cast some doubt and ask some questions. The world has changed since COVID. That hasn't disappeared. We need the right culture to embrace feedback and diverse views. Now, I believe CBA has done this to avoid criticisms from people. You may argue that you're simply going back to the old ways of 3 years ago. We had a meeting and those facilities weren't there. But the world has changed and moved on. CBA, ahead of all the banks, is ahead in technology. And you're depriving this technology of all those people, not the people here today, but the people that are listening online that can't contribute, they can't make a comment, they can't ask a question, they can't give feedback at any of the points that have been raised. Telstra held their AGM yesterday. Telstra allowed questions from the floor. They had a host that asked questions on behalf of interstate and remote people. They allowed people to type the questions into the computer so that could be asked. So I ask for some indulgence today if some extra questions are required from me, for example, on behalf of others, and if you like, I'm happy to identify who those other shareholders are. These are not my questions, by the way, this is just the governance of the meeting. They should be allowed to participate fully. I did request over the last 2 years, I attended online and I had questions. They were properly made questions, and I am critical of many things that are in the Commonwealth Bank. But I do actually try to provide my criticisms in a fair or a balanced way based on facts and based on what really has happened. Now, in 2020 and 2021, in fact in 2020, I thought I was doing the right thing by letting Ms Mulhern know in advance of the meeting that I'll be putting some questions up. I think that that's just worked against me, because in 2020, my 6 questions, I put through the computer, I received receipts for all of them. I was watching Ms Livingston on screen get to the point of, well, we have no more questions, and none of mine had been read out. So I was disappointed and I was angry. I called Link. Link held me online for 45 minutes and I watched the AGM close down as I was online. So, Mr Caulfield, your questions are being triaged. Now, I contacted the Commonwealth Bank later, Dr Brendan French. He said, we never received your questions. I was furious. I wrote to Link. It took me about 7 attempts, but as Mr Common will tell you, I persevere. So I got a letter from Link confirming, yes, we received all the questions and yes, they were passed to CBA. So, yes, Vicky Clarkson's here. I'm not sure, Mr Chairman, if it's appropriate for her to comment. But I think this has been deliberate deception to avoid criticisms. And so when I received the annual report in the mail, the gentleman before was talking about hunky-dory. It's out of balance. I'm reading all of the good things in here. You know, the $700 million fine, the largest in Australia's corporate history, it's hardly mentioned. The Financial Services Royal Commission, the Commonwealth Bank virtually instigated it. It's hardly mentioned. Your remedial action plan, the positive outcome from it, I mean, it sounds like a gold award, but it came out of culture, governance and accountability failures. So I think you haven't got it yet. And I know that Mr. Common is a person of great intent and ambition for himself, but for the company, for the shareholders, to do the best for climate change, to do the best for all stakeholders. But I'm saying it's not getting through. These aren't my questions, but I'm worried for all those other shareholders out there that can't speak. Thank you.
Mr. Caulfield, thank you. And I would just say it is really important for us to get this right, but to have you here today and for you to be able to ask the questions that you need and make the comments for us does hold us accountable, and at no point would we preclude you from asking further questions. If it's just two at a time, feel free to keep coming back up. Very happy to hear from you. In relation to the approach for the meeting, the notice of meeting was very clear that it would be an in-person meeting, and the last time that we have been in person in Melbourne, I think, was 2016. It's really important that we as a board are in the room with our shareholders and that you're able to ask the questions, sing songs, complain about the things that we're not doing well. We must hear your feedback, and we are hearing your feedback. So I'm very happy to hear your questions. In relation to the notice of meeting, we also said that to the extent, and I said it earlier actually, to the extent that there are multiple questions that are very similar, we will address the themes, or we will address some of them specifically as indication of further questions. It's quite possible to ask the same question over and over again. We will make sure the question is answered, and we'll answer it again if necessary, but at a point in time, and I don't have any of the specifics that you addressed, but we will make sure that we actually address those questions. So today, we're open to hear the questions that you're asking, and I think everyone here today would say that there is no holding back where people have a critical view to give us. We'll absolutely hear that. There are going to be some positive views. As a bank, and I think this is a point that you raised, we have had to reform ourselves dramatically over the last 3 years. There was a Royal Commission. We don't forget that for a moment. There was an APRA-instigated prudential inquiry. We do not forget that for a moment. Changing culture is not easy. Changing culture takes tone from the top and great leadership. And under Catherine's leadership, we absolutely have that. And under Matt's leadership as CEO, we have that as well. This board focuses on culture, values, behaviours at every board meeting. We want to get the strategy right, but we have to do it for our customers. And I think, Mr. Caulfield, your feedback today is essential for us to hear, and please feel to be unconstrained in continuing to provide it. In terms of the specific questions, I think there were many comments. You asked questions about the NOM. I think I've addressed that. We are having in-person meetings. We do give shareholders ahead of time the opportunity to write to us. And I have a number of questions here that if they aren't addressed in the meeting specifically from shareholders in advance, I'll read them out, and I'll do that at an appropriate point in time. In terms of how we manage meetings, we always look to address that and consider that each year. We have not had an in-person meeting since 2019. I believe it's important that we have an in-person meeting, and I do believe that we will get many of the questions and themes that all of our shareholders want asked today or asked in advance, and we did provide that opportunity. And the webcast is available real-time to shareholders who can't be in the room today, and we'll continue to undertake that methodology. So, Mr. Caulfield, I'm sure you'll have a follow-up.
Yes, on that. You haven't answered my question of why have you excluded shareholders, owners of the company that are interstate and remote from lodging questions. It's not about are those questions the same as others. You don't know because they can't lodge the question.
In fact, that's not correct. They have had the opportunity to lodge questions in advance. That was clearly set out in the notice of meeting, and we have received many questions via that methodology.
Of course I understand that, but some people choose to attend a meeting or choose to lodge their questions in advance. So if I've given my questions to Carmel Mulhern, the company secretary, in advance, and they've not appeared at the meeting, there's a lot of us that are not going to provide those questions in advance.
Thank
So
you,
it's a
Mr. Caulfield.
furphy for you to say people can provide them in advance. I'm not happy with the answer, and you haven't given me an explanation. In fact, if I'm to read from your
Thank you,
CPA...
Mr. Caulfield. Thank you. There have been a number of questions, and I'm very happy for you to come back. But if we can move on to another question and then follow the rule of the 2 questions. I think there were a couple of questions there. So I'll ask you to
They
come
were just
back.
around your governance. They were not my questions. I've flown from Queensland and I have my questions. And none of that was to be raised until we knew that the others couldn't get online, which we only found out about last night.
I think we'll beg
So
to differ on that one, Mr. Caulfield. But if we could perhaps come back to your questions after we've moved through following the protocols that we've indicated. And thank you for travelling down, and very happy to keep answering your questions, but we might just share it around if that's okay.